Welcome to TradeTheNBA.com. This is Jonas, reporters for the 4th of January. Another exciting day in the markets and right within our expectation. We had seen the orange here pop up above. At the same time, cyan was starting to break, and that started the open. We were below this 38% key level. More importantly, the 2505 was that major algo level that we had. And well, the day started from there, and we were already at lower shakeouts, so it was no surprise with any of that. And it just exacerbated, of course, everyone blames Apple earnings, blah, 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 blah. But as I've pointed out before, these indications were happening before that, so obviously some people had an idea of what was going on, which is what I've always said, that you just want to be ahead of where they're at. You can see even weaker from a NASDAQ standpoint below the 23% now. And, from the ABM standpoint, hitting right exactly pretty close to where that original step down was for the buy signal that started with that yellow candle build. Way back down at the lows, the euro again, it suffered, came back a little bit, so there's this oddity that's taking place with there, a little bit of support within that, and that's mostly just money fleeing back and forth. What was really interesting for us was the 5K, and this was a busy chart, so I figured we might as well just get right to it because that was the exciting action for the day. We had started off with that peak move that we had called out the previous day, and that led to the breakdown that took place. And then once we had the orange candle, what we look for in that is usually retrace the open. In this case, it did it immediately within a few minutes, and then produced a second set, and the small pop there caused a decline. And I pointed out this little white gold, well, you guess you could call it gray, but it was an indication where I was talking about within a specific range trade, say that you already know that you're in a short signal or that you've had an inversion. When you get these separations of the cyan to green, it's usually a good indication to go ahead and jump on that activity. And in this particular case, produced a nice downdraft below the 23 and pulled all the way down by the lows before we ended up with orange moving below the red. At this particular point, though, green was below red and didn't turn over until right here, but the orange was still trailing us so far. It was a good buy from that spot, and that produced a nice up move, which gave us this early signal right here where you had the green crossing below. The difficulty with this one is we're right at the zero line, and you didn't quite have a steel coming from above below situation for a crossover, because again I want to point out this is crossovers that really become the super potent. And then we ended up with a positive extreme and got it right here. We didn't quite have green falling, but as I was pointing out, risk to reward wise, this was a very easy one. We had the algo at the 24.95 right above at this particular spot, so that made it easy to set up a stop within there. And the expectation was that you would get a continuation of cyan moving higher, green lower. In this case, it did it right in the next bar. So even if you waited for one more bar, you still would have been very close to where that was. That led to a nice, quick 10-point move when the steel crossed, warning, hey, we could get a little pop right there. And then after it did that just briefly, we ended up with another spread that started another down move. Again, that's the exact same one that we were talking about over here. So it was a perfect day for some of these great signals to pop up. Now, with the steel rising, you'd be kind of concerned that you might get a little bit of pop-up action, but actually it faded pretty darn quick and was pretty consistent with that. We ended up with a dip right down here of the orange, but within that broader short signal that had been achieved with that steel moving above cyan, it was just a matter of setting the stop at that particular point, and then boom, it just continued to cascade lower. And once we got into the deep, now when you're below that negative 13.5, you usually know that you're going to get a retrace. The beauty of it was that we ended up with a another orange candle, so we knew that the open of that level was going to get retraced, and that was all the way back down to the 24.55. So after we get the brief up start, boom, right at the 23%. The setup came in. We didn't quite have this steel dropping yet, but it's close enough that you can estimate within a bar or so, and in this case, the next bar closed pretty much flat, the exact same, and you got a little bit closer to everything doing exactly what you wanted, because at this point then the red starts to roll over, and that's boom, right where it takes us down to new lows. So in some of these cases, you get almost perfect signals, but not always premium, but we have very specific ranges. You already know that you have the high range right there from the 23, so it's not a big distance from a stop standpoint. In this case, 64 to 66, only 2 points to the highs of that, and even if you wanted to allow for the 38, it would still be within reasonable range at 69. So 5-point stop, and then boom, cascaded lower, gold all the way at the low, so you're really not expecting a whole lot from there. And then we ended up with successive builds of red DOC and moving above that 13.5 at the same point here, puts in it, and then it's just a matter of following that ABM. In this particular case, I was following the ABM gold, a green on this setup here. And as we came across, this was a good question from a couple of members about how it got into this sort of muck area where cyan was already above green, and you had this back and forth. But what we had was the break of the red into a new zone. And that usually creates a significant amount of support uplift. What I'd be looking for is that to break down. And just as it was getting close to do that, you had orange falling right below, and that caused the takeoff. And at that point, it was pretty straightforward to follow it until we ended up with a clear DOC where you actually had the above move, and then boom, as it clearly indicated going there, and then short-lived as it was. This is what happens when the steel turns around, and it's like, you have to pay attention to that. It drifted another bar a little bit lower, but that's the point to move that short stop, and boom, the turnaround was pretty darn fast, and it created all positive extremes throughout that range. So when you get the crossover with the orange, in this particular case, you didn't quite have the perfect with the steel, so it's not ideal. I'm usually looking for a short burst on that. In this particular case, ABM from a support standpoint, but then it did a much clearer, where it tries to join with the steel and then rejects at the same time. You get the exact same move with the green crossing back over. Even if you wanted to wait for a break of the ABM, would be fine as well, and then that one continued to go across and produced more of the exact same kind of signaling. And you can see that when you don't get that immediate cross at the same point, it trades back and forth for a little bit. Didn't take long if we slide over from that one. Went sideways south a little bit and then produced exactly the same thing. Some of these very weak buys that develop right within the bottom there, they're still reasonable to take. There still were several points. It's just, my God, the chart would be so full if I was marking all of these. But we posted this one as well on the Skype chat as we were doing it. And again, if you waited for a really super clean setup there, you ended up with that meeting point and the rejection. Could have had this one colored in the, in fact, I'll go ahead and change it just for the fun of it. Put it into the grayish color, and that was that separation move again. Interestingly enough, at the same time, you're already getting a crossover. So you already have the weakness with the crossover. That usually means you're going to get a continuation follow through, and that's exactly what we got until we got the bottom down here, right around the 23%, we started to get the buy and the fairly decent shakeup. But what you had was a dip below the red line. So the expectation is that you're going to revisit this low of that last orange bar right there. And that gave us a very specific target coming back, boom. In fact, even after the big pump, we ended up with the same rejection mode. This time you had the nice steel cross below, which much more helpful. And boom, right to it. Didn't really produce a clean buy, so this was a little bit tougher to gauge from an upside. You just had the rising DOC red, which is the longer term buyers, and the green eventually crosses over it right over there, but it sort of gets a little murky right at that point until we ended up with, again, that same crossover. With orange coming above, green goes below, and the steel crosses as the cyan's rising. In this particular point, key above, right above zero. Same thing happened here when we were moving above zero. Those tend to have a little bit more influence to them. And I projected the target at that point. We were looking at 55-ish, which was right about down in here. It was 55 3/4, I believe, is what it set the full retrace that we were putting, because I was expecting all the way to get to down near these lows, and sure enough, met that and proceeded to continue. And then we started to get some little murky action in between here as we were ending the day. It was a little positive and stuff at that point. After this move, I was sort of nothing more needed to go over for the day on that one. That was just beautiful, clean action. We did end up with the exact same configurations right here. In this case, it was beautiful because the orange rising along with the cyan and the green crossing right below it, all at the same time. The difference for this one, a little bit tougher, is the steel. Being so far away from cyan, it sometimes takes a little bit longer for that to get down to give you clean draft through, but this one reacted quickly because it was right at the 50%. We'd already produced some yellow dots, which very close to positive extremes, and so there's warning that, at least I was thinking that this bottom would be filled and that would give you plenty of room to set a stop at that point, and that worked out effectively because it continued to just trail softly. We ended up with another orange, which meant the open of this one, so on a little pop. It wasn't a ton. We ended up with the open at 48. Got towards the 38%. You can see that orange coming above it, so I was able to take that, right around the 55 range, and looking for that full target, and boom, it hit that, and then after hours started. So, whew, beautiful day. Market was very cooperative, despite as negative as it was. I was happy to show that you could still take longs within this setup at the right points. You have to be a little bit more cautious with making sure you're getting the right kind of improvement from the shakeout, either meaning that you've created a P2, a secondary low, that kind of situation. When you ended up with this one over here, you'd notice you didn't get the orange below red, and when that happens, I usually know that we're coming back to the lows, if not breaking them, because it's a clear indication that you're unable to get this kind of deep setup, which gives you the buy. And when you get one that's so close to the green and it reverses immediately, that's also a pretty clear indication. This one was much sharper, where you get a nice downdraft and a clear break above between the green and red DOC, especially on a much higher shakeout, and that's what produced that little bit of pop, which was perfect enough to take opportunity for that short. So a lot of exciting stuff and a lot of good action on the Skype chat, so you can go back and review those as I was posting them, but this gives you a good way to kind of gauge how you'll take additional trades going forward with within some of these setups. All in all, though, nothing to complain about. This market's performing exactly as expected, despite what some people might think. Really nothing to object to at this particular time. So we'll just keep taking the signals as they come and follow the broader ranges without much to worry about, because in fact the added volatility just makes for a lot of points to add up in a given day. It's been like this since October, so super exciting time to be in trading in the market, especially with our indicators giving us such clear action. As always, though, I will keep putting up charts and relevant setups as they occur during the day. But trade well, and we will talk again for the beginning of next week.